There is a question that has followed this story for 2,000 years, and it is not the question most people think it is. The question is not simply, why did Judas betray Jesus? The question is, how does a man spend 3 years walking beside someone, eating with them, watching them perform miracles, listening to them speak and still arrive at a place where betrayal becomes possible? How does loyalty turn? How does a line that once seemed uncrossable quietly move? And most unsettling of all, how does a person not fully realize what they are doing until it is already done? This is not a story about a villain. Villains are easy to understand. We keep our distance from them. We tell ourselves we are nothing like them. But Judas was not distant. Judas was chosen. Judas was trusted. And that is precisely what makes his story so deeply, uncomfortably relevant, because the psychology that destroyed him is not ancient. It is human. It is operating in people today. It may have operated in you. It has certainly operated in people you love. So let us go back to the beginning, not to judge, but to understand. When Judas joined the 12 disciples, he was not a reluctant participant. He was selected. Among hundreds of people who followed Jesus in those early days, Judas was among the small circle pulled close. And not just close, he was given responsibility. He became the keeper of the group's money, the one who managed funds, who handled practical needs. That is not the role you give to someone you do not trust. And here is what we rarely pause on long enough. Judas believed. At least in the beginning, he believed enough to leave his life behind. He followed. He listened. He watched things happen that had no rational explanation. Whatever doubts he carried, he stayed. For years, he stayed. So the question is not who he became. The question is what happened between the man who followed and the man who betrayed. And the answer almost certainly begins with expectation. In the first century, the word Messiah carried enormous weight. It was not a spiritual title alone. For many Jewish people living under Roman occupation, the Messiah was expected to be a liberator, a king, someone who would restore Israel's dignity, overthrow foreign rule, establish a new kingdom with real political power. This was the cultural atmosphere Judas breathed. These were the hopes layered beneath the surface of everything. And Jesus was extraordinary. Whatever you believe about who he was, the historical record agrees that he drew massive crowds, performed acts no one could explain, and spoke with an authority that unsettled the most powerful religious institutions of his time. If you were someone looking for a revolutionary leader, you would have had every reason to think this is him. This is finally the one. But Jesus kept confusing those expectations. He welcomed the poor. He touched people who were considered unclean. He talked about a kingdom that was not coming through armies or conquest. He spoke of suffering, of service, of giving up your life rather than seizing power. For someone like Judas, and we do not know his full interior life, but we can read the shape of his behavior, this may have slowly registered as something between disappointment and frustration. Because a man who carries expectations into a relationship will eventually find the moments where reality does not match them. And what he does with those moments says everything. Most people do not leave. They adjust. They reinterpret. They stay close while growing quietly distant inside. And that quiet interior distance is where the trouble always begins. Disappointment is not a dramatic event. It does not announce itself. It is a slow erosion. You keep showing up, but something has shifted. You are still in the room, but you are already partially somewhere else. You start noticing the things that irritate you more than the things that inspire you. You start building a private case, a mental file of grievances, of unmet expectations, of ways things should have gone differently. And once that file exists, the mind begins a process that psychologists call rationalization. Rationalization is not lying to yourself. It is more subtle than that. It is genuinely believing your own justifications. It is constructing a story that makes your desired action feel not only acceptable, but logical, even righteous. Judas had access to money. The Gospel of John notes that he sometimes helped himself to what was in the bag. This detail matters less as a moral accusation and more as a psychological window. It tells us that Judas had already been quietly crossing a line for some time. Not in one dramatic breach of trust, but in small, invisible ways. The kind of crossings that are easy to explain away. He probably needed it. He was probably doing more than anyone recognized. He probably deserved it in ways no one appreciated. This is how the erosion works. Small compromises do not feel like failures of character. They feel like corrections. Like getting what is fair. And every time a person does that, every time they quietly take something they know they should not, the conscience adjusts its threshold. What once felt like a transgression begins to feel ordinary. And what feels ordinary loses its power to stop you. By the time Judas walked to the chief priests and offered to hand Jesus over, he had not suddenly become a different person. He was the same person he had always been, just further along a road he had been walking for a long time. And this is the part that should make us stop. He did not go to them in anguish. He went with a proposal. He negotiated. 30 pieces of silver. Not a fortune. Not life-changing wealth by any measure. Which raises the haunting possibility that the money was not even the real reason. The money may have been something else entirely. Proof. Proof that he had made a decision. Proof that it was real now, not just a thought. Because sometimes people act not out of pure desire, but out of a need to externalize a conclusion they have already reached in private. The mind decides. The act is just the confirmation. Then came the garden. And perhaps the most psychologically loaded gesture in all of human history. He identified Jesus to the soldiers with a kiss. A sign of affection. A greeting between people who know each other well. He used the language of closeness to deliver betrayal. There is something in that detail that goes beyond irony. It suggests a man who had not fully reconciled what he was doing with what it meant. Someone who either could not bring himself to simply point and say take him, or someone who, on some level, still did not believe he was truly capable of it. Like a person who commits a cruelty with gentleness, as if the gentleness cancels something out. It does not. What happened next is one of the most psychologically devastating sequences in the biblical record. When Judas saw that Jesus had been condemned, the text says he was seized with remorse. He went back to the priests. He threw the coins onto the temple floor. He said, "I have sinned. I have betrayed innocent blood." And they gave him nothing. No absolution. No reversal. No way out. Here is the distinction that breaks people. There is a difference between remorse and repentance. Remorse is the pain of consequences. Repentance is the willingness to change direction. Remorse says, "I cannot believe this happened." Repentance says, "I am going to become someone who could not do this again." Judas felt remorse deeply enough to return the money, deeply enough to confess. But there was nowhere for that remorse to go. The thing could not be undone. And a conscience that has been suppressed for too long, then suddenly forced to feel the full weight of what it permitted, that kind of pain has nowhere to travel except inward. He did not find a way back. He found a way out. And this is where we must sit with the hardest part of the story. Not the betrayal itself, but the tragedy of timing. The tragedy of a man who felt the wrongness of his direction all along, who had moments of doubt, of discomfort, of quiet conscience, but who kept choosing to move forward rather than turn around. Because turning around has a cost. Because admitting you were wrong means giving up what you were pursuing. Because the story you have told yourself about your own reasons is not easy to dismantle. The most dangerous betrayals in human life are rarely committed by people with no conscience. They are committed by people who have one but who spent just long enough convincing themselves that they had a reason. Judas is not a warning about evil people. He is a warning about the ordinary human capacity to negotiate with your own conscience. To let disappointment quietly rewrite loyalty. To let small crossings numb you to larger ones. To let the story you tell yourself about your actions drift so far from the truth that by the time reality collides with it, there is nothing left to hold on to. The betrayal did not begin with 30 pieces of silver. It began with the first private compromise he told himself did not matter. And that is the part of this story that was never really about Judas at all.